too. Finally. How long do we have?
35.
Alguém que não sabe quem é?
Eu.
O pessoal aí no fundo que tá falando mais alto que o microfone aqui. Vocês sabem quem é esse cara aqui?
Não dá pra ouvir o que tá falando.
Manda todo mundo calar a boca lá, aproveite.
Pessoal, Emmanuel Goldstein, fundador da 2600, aquela revistinha que vocês já devem ter ouvido falar, produziu e fez vários filmes do mundo hacker e a apresentação dele está na mão dele. Então, ouçam o que ele tem a dizer.
Hi. For those who don't know, I'm Emmanuel Goldstein. I'm editor of 2600 Magazine. In fact, this is what 2600 Magazine looks like these days. I assume you've all seen it at some point. A lot of people came up to me and said, I used to read that magazine years ago. I never explained why they stopped. But I'll ask you some questions later. This is, let me know if I speak too fast, although I have to try and cram a lot of stuff into the 30 minutes that we have. And also, it's been very hectic because I arrived here yesterday and immediately had to face a major crisis in that our domain 2600.com got hijacked. So I made it off the airplane okay without hijacking, but as soon as I landed, I found out that yes, in fact, this is one of the worst things that can happen to somebody who runs a domain, because everybody thinks that your domain got hacked, and it did not. It's simply the fault of a company known as, have you heard of them? Network Solutions. They should be called network disasters because their slogan is "We cause problems, we create all sorts of mayhem." Basically, what somebody did was phone them, give them a phone call, and since they have security in place that will that won't allow unauthorized people to make changes to domain names. They basically asked them, well, there's a challenge question. There's a question that says something like, what is your favorite city? Or not something so easy to guess, but just there's always a challenge question. If you forget your Hotmail account, they have a question that only you would know the answer to. And these people, they didn't know the answer, they didn't know the question. So they called Network Solutions and said, what's the question? And oh, well, could you change the answer for us, basically? And Network Solutions sent an email to us saying, we've just changed your challenge question. Of course, I was 40,000 feet in the air when that email was sent to me telling me that they had just changed our question to something that I didn't know the answer to, but some idiot somewhere else did. So by the time I got here, they had taken over the routing of the domain. They had rerouted our website to a gay porn video, which, if you ever want to get reactions from people, from customers, oh, that's what you do. So yeah, the world noticed that. And in addition, and probably more troublesome to me, was the fact that people logging into our machine didn't know that they weren't logging into our machine. They simply got a password request and entered their password, and it was sent to another machine. And at the same time, our email going to us, was potentially going to a different machine. So all of this got me very, very angry. Mostly at Network Solutions, because this never should have happened in the first place. This is basic security. So I got on the phone with them and said that we have to stop this. We have to disable this immediately. Their response was, well, it takes 48 hours for this to process. 48 hours of gay porn on our website? No, I don't think so. I don't think so, guys. Listen, it took you 2 minutes to get this thing up so you can get it down just as quickly. Well, that's when they started asking me questions. They wanted me to verify my identity. They wanted to call me. And so I told them, well, I'm in Brazil. And they're like, So you claim to be Emmanuel Goldstein, yet you want us to call you on a Brazilian phone number. Yeah, we've seen this before. So right away I'm at a disadvantage. So the people who have taken over our name, they have more legitimacy than I do in Network Solutions' eyes. So it got extremely frustrating. They said, okay, well, here's what we'll do. We'll send you an email, and you respond to that email. And I said to them, look, don't you understand what's happened here? Our website has been pointed someplace else. Our email is not going to us. If you send me an email, it's going to go to the other people. And then they'll be able to verify my identity, and they'll have even more legitimacy in your eyes. So they said, okay, well then, can you call us from the phone number that reported the problem in the first place? A friend of mine had contacted me while I was in a car here in Sao Paulo, and he had never called me before. And yet somehow they thought his phone number was the legitimate phone number. So I had to call from his phone number and prove that I was me. Well, basically, to make a long story short, because we have it, I was able to get a three-way connection from my friend's cell phone and convinced them that in fact it was me. And they said, okay, we'll get this disabled. However, it's still propagating throughout the net. We've been in touch with our lawyer, and we intend to see just how much we can hold Network Solutions responsible for all the chaos and mayhem they have caused us. Now, needless to say, the people who did this too, they also bear some responsibility. But coming from the hacker community, I understand that there's a lot of idiots out there, people who have a lot of time on their hands, people who just like to cause mayhem and chaos, and that's why we have security, to prevent that kind of thing from actually happening. So we knew that there was this threat. We took the precautions that we could take to prevent our website and our email site from being victims. And Network Solutions, they're the ones that threw open the door and let people in. While I hold the people that did this responsible, they will be dealt with in our own way. The people who legally were supposed to keep our site secure, they're the ones that we really think should basically pay the penalty one way or another. And we're going to look into that. Needless to say, we're going to switch registrars as soon as we can. However, Network Solutions put a what they call a legal lock on our account, so we can't switch to another registrar for 60 days for our own security. Yeah. So anyway, that kind of reminds me of what I usually begin this talk with, which is how I got involved in the whole hacker world in the first place, which was basically through a series of events, just sort of stumbling onto computers one day in high school and playing around with them. I never took a computer course. I never really was very technical. I wasn't ever into programming. Just was into playing with computers, manipulating them, getting to do things that they weren't really supposed to do in the eyes of the people that made the policies and put the computers together. So one of the first things that I got involved with was a company called GTE Telenet. I don't know how many of you remember that from the mid-80s, or maybe you were around in the mid-80s. But basically, they ran a system known as Telemail that basically allowed you to have an email account. This is before the internet. We had to call bulletin board systems, BBSs. You all know what those are, right? Okay. They went at speeds of like 300 BPS, 300 baud, or 1200 if you were lucky. You had to call a BBS and wait for it to be free. Wait for the person who was using it to stop using it. One person at a time could use a bulletin board system. One person. And you would log on to this, and you'd read whatever news was posted, and you'd see if you got any email, and the email would have to come from somebody who was on that system. It couldn't come from another system. How could that happen? So you would basically, maybe if you were lucky, get on this bulletin board once a day and get maybe one message. And that was how we spent our nights, calling over and over again to get through a busy signal so that we could connect to a bulletin board system. Well, Telemail provided us with something a lot better. It was actually through one of these bulletin boards that I learned about its existence. Somebody told me, hey, there's this cool system, dial this number with your modem and connect to it. In fact, I was giving a talk in Italy, a 2-hour version of this talk. And I actually, in my head, remembered the phone number. I said, oh my God, 667-5566, hit return twice, type P1 for terminal type. You get an @ sign, type C, space, and then 21250 for the connection, and it asks you for a password. And I was amazed how much was still in my head. this stuff really sticks with you. But if you, instead of typing a number, if you just type the word mail, you would simply get a prompt that said username, and that was telemail kicking in. If you knew a username, then you would have to type a password, and then you were in. Well, it turns out the default password for telemail was the letter A. Yes, one letter out of 26. So it wasn't very difficult to figure it out, to guess the actual passwords. Getting the usernames, that wasn't hard either, because once you got into one account, you could get a listing of all the users. So we simply spent our time going through list and list of these usernames and typing the letter A over and over again. And we were getting something like 1 in 5 success rates. So before you knew it, we were running telemail more than telemail was. We had so many accounts, but the beauty of it was that we had the first taste of what the internet would be like, where you could call a local number and send somebody with a weird name email, and they would get it no matter where they were, and they could respond without you having to hang up. So this was cool. This was what hackers were into back then, finding security holes and figuring out ways to make their lives a little bit more interesting. It also led to a number of other communications issues that we had, such as one of the first voicemail systems was IBM's ADS, Audio Distribution System. I discovered that one day simply by war dialing, and that is basically calling a whole bunch of numbers over and over, different numbers, to see if anything interesting answered. Now today, you always get computer tones and fax machines and voicemail systems. Back then, it was kind of rare. You usually get people saying hello, and you hang up because you don't want to talk to them. Go on to the next number. So when I got a recording at 800-444-22, I can't believe I remember this one too. It's 426-2222 was the phone number. 426, by the way, spelled IBM. They ran the system, so I guess they had that exchange. It asked me for my my last name. It said, enter your last name. So I entered a last name. It didn't enter my last name. And it gave back somebody's name, somebody's full name. And then it asked for a password using touch tones. And so I figured, what could the password be? And I entered the person's first name. Bingo, I was in, just like that. It wasn't very difficult back then. So this was an audio system, basically allowed you to send messages to other people who are on the system. So once we got a few of those accounts, a bunch of hackers were running that too. And we simply had a way, using any phone anywhere, because it was a toll-free number, it didn't even cost anything to call. We were able to actually leave voicemails for each other. And this was unprecedented back then. People didn't have this kind of access. So it was really, really cool that we were able to do this. And we figured out all sorts of other ways to own the system. They had what was known as guest accounts. Default password was 426, again spelling IBM. The guest account simply allowed you to call that number and leave a message for the person who owned the account. That was the only person who leave a message for it. So we discovered that the guest account could also change his password if you wanted to. So we discovered if you kept trying to change the password as the guest, and you entered the first 3 letters of what the real password was, it would tell you that there was a conflict with another password on your account. So it was relatively simple for us to figure out ways to get the real password. So yeah, before you knew it, we were running that system too, and using it more than IBM ever did. And then finally, the 3 things that we used the most of back then was a system run by General Motors known as TravelNet. This was a system to make telephone calls. You would enter a code, and it would route the phone call however you chose to route it. Basically, this was an interesting system because it was voice activated. You would say 1, and it would repeat back the number 1. This was brand new back then. So we played around with this system too, and then we decided to use a little social engineering. We called General Motors, and it said we wanted to learn more about this system, and could they send us a press packet or tell us who to talk to get more information. They gave us a phone number that had a demonstration of the system, and the demonstration included using a code. And we tried the code, and it actually worked. It was actually a valid code that they used as their demo code. Then we figured out that all the codes added up to the same number. I don't know why they did that, but I mean, it's so easy for us to get all the long distance codes we ever needed. And so we had a way now to make phone calls anywhere for free. We had a way to communicate with each other using email or voicemail, well before anybody else was able to do this. So we thought it was great, we thought it was cool, the FBI thought it was a crime. And so they started coming after people all over the country. The computer I used, in fact, I didn't even own a computer back then. I was using a friend's computer, and I worked at a radio station that had a computer. They raided us one day and took the computers, and I had to basically tell them, look, it's me you're looking for, it's not all these other people. If you know, this is something that was illegal as far as using GTE. They were after the GTE telemail thing more than anything. They didn't even know about ADS, didn't know about TravelNet, so I didn't tell them about that. So I said, look, if you have questions about this, come to me, and I'll be happy to answer them. And basically what wound up happening was I had to answer questions before a room full of security people and FBI agents and all sorts of other interested parties. I had to answer their questions as to how exactly did you get in? I explained, well, you know, the letter A, it wasn't very difficult, one letter. How can we make our security better? Well, you might want to try using more than a one-letter password. Try, if you can remember, a two-letter password, or maybe go as high as 3 or 4. I didn't want to tax their brains too much. So they were writing this down, and it was like they never thought of this before. And afterwards, they thanked me for my cooperation. I was cooperating. I got a 10-month probation sentence. Had to pay for the computer time I used, which was about $200. Fine. And that was that. Now, it's obviously changed quite a bit since then. They don't treat people quite like that anymore for breaking security. But it didn't quench my thirst for wanting to play with systems and learn more. In fact, if anything, it made me realize that what we needed was a way to get information out to people. And that's what led to the birth of 2600 in 1984. We knew there was no magazine out there that was currently serving the needs of computer hackers, phone freaks, people like that. And so a bunch of us, basically using the bulletin boards as ways of communicating and getting stories, decided we were going to put out a magazine, a newsletter as it was back then. It was basically 3 sheets of paper with printing on both sides. And we simply put out the word, hey, we're putting out a newsletter. And we want to send issues to anybody who's interested. Just send us a self-addressed stamped envelope. We'll send you an issue. And we started getting self-addressed stamped envelopes in the mail. It was amazing. People actually wanted to see this. And so we made a first issue, which had some rather interesting stories back then. If I had more time, I'd get into them. But we sent it out to about maybe 25 people total. Dumped it into a mailbox and kind of ran home thinking that we were about to get arrested for what we did. And it was a scary thing because nobody else was doing this. We had just dealt with the FBI, and they were threatening us with 55 years in jail for using telemail. And we didn't know what was going to happen next. So this was kind of new territory for us. We put out the issue, and lo and behold, people started to subscribe. And after a year of this, people started to renew their subscriptions. And that's when we knew we had something. That's when we knew it was going to be a project that wasn't going to end anytime soon. And now it's almost 25 years later. And we're on newsstands, we're distributed all over the world. And it's amazing because ever since the first year that we came out, people have been telling us the hacker scene is dead. It's all over. It's not like it used to be. And I don't think this can ever be true. I don't think this can ever really happen because there's always something new to explore, always something new to break, or to figure out how to break security or crack some kind of tool, as the talk on iPhones demonstrated. So basically, we spent that time growing, learning, putting out all sorts of articles on things, and the community grew around us. It was tiny back then. There were basically a few dozen people in what I consider to be the hacker community back in the late 80s, early 90s. We all knew each other. We'd go to conferences, rather small conferences, smaller than this, where maybe 50 people throughout the entire United States would come. And I gotta say, those were cool days because you knew a lot of the people and it was really more of a community. Today, obviously, it's tens of thousands of people, if anything, who consider themselves to be hackers, and that's a whole discussion in and of itself. So basically, the fascination with hackers spread throughout society, and we started seeing things like books come out, books like Cyberpunk, The Hacker Underground. We started seeing movies, sneakers, hackers, various other kind of silly films. And every time this happened, it would inspire thousands and thousands of people to write to us and say, I want to be a hacker, teach me how to hack. And it's very frustrating to try and explain to somebody, you don't teach somebody to hack, you become a hacker by experimenting, by playing with things, by doing what people tell you not to do, to learn, in order to learn how the system works, how the machines work. You have to be very, very patient. You have to pretty much give up your social life. You have to spend all night inside playing with something and make the rest of your friends believe you're wasting your time. That's when you're a hacker, when your friends believe you're wasting your time. And most people didn't want to hear that. They wanted to get codes. They wanted to get passwords. And we were never about that. We were never about the easy way out, about just simply giving people information and thinking that that would make them learn. Because most times it doesn't. You have to give them the desire to learn the information themselves and explore and eventually teach other people. So that's the challenge that we face as the hacker world grew bigger and bigger. The other challenge we faced, of course, was the crackdown that occurred throughout the 90s. It affected such people as fiber optic, I know many of you know, it comes to Brazil all the time now. Basically, fiber was somebody who was targeted by the federal authorities in the United States because he knew so much. He had all this knowledge. He had this very annoying characteristic of when somebody asked him a question, he would answer it. And they don't like that in the security world, they don't like that in the government world, because if you know something that you're not supposed to know and you tell other people, then other people know it too, and it becomes a real problem. And the thing that I've noticed with people who run systems, people who aren't quite sure themselves how it works, they get very, very paranoid when anything happens that they don't understand. They react with fear, they react with anger, they react with all sorts of retaliation, and that's why hackers are targeted so much, because people don't understand what it is they're doing. They see their systems, like what we saw yesterday, being somehow manipulated, doing something they don't want it to do, and they just want to strike out at whoever is responsible, and they become irrational. And prison isn't good enough for these people. They should be locked away for the rest of their lives. People actually say things like this. We had the case of Kevin Mitnick, who I know many of you know as well. He was somebody who was in trouble for quite some time, since the 80s. And we were always asking, okay, what exactly did this guy do to make him the world's #1 enemy hacker that everybody wants to lock away in prison and keep from a telephone, and keep away from computers for the rest of his life? And we never really got a straight answer to that question, yet he remained the biggest enemy to freedom, apparently. That was another case that we documented throughout the 1990s, and the third case, of course, being the Bernie S. case, which was probably one of the weirdest ones, because he wound up being put in prison simply because he had some computer equipment on him that could have been used, wasn't used, but could have been used to make free phone calls. And the federal authorities had the ability to charge somebody with a crime if they wanted to. Most people found that this equipment wouldn't be given a second glance, but they wanted to charge Bernie S. with a crime. Why? Because he had come to a 2600 meeting and had brought pictures of Secret Service agents that had been taken with a camera when they visited somebody's house who happened to have a surveillance camera. And so that person took pictures of them, including one picture where they were painting their nose. They didn't like that kind of picture getting out. And unfortunately for them and for Bernie, the meeting that he brought those pictures to was the same meeting that the TV crew also came to. And those pictures wound up on the 10 o'clock news later that week. And they saw it and they got very upset. And when they found Bernie S. In possession of computer equipment that could have been used to make free phone calls, they decided to charge him with everything they could find. He never was found to have caused a penny of damage or made a free phone call or anything like that. In fact, they even said in court that there were no victims of this crime. They managed to keep him in jail almost 2 years. Now, this leads to a very interesting part of our history, and that is the radio show. We had started doing a radio show. Did any of you listen to Off the Hook? No, it's easy. If you have the internet, you just have to go to www.2600.com/offthehook. And if there isn't gay porn there will be a radio show. In fact, we archive all the radio shows from 1988 to the present. You can listen live. We're on every Wednesday night, except not next Wednesday night. And we basically have talked about everything involving computers, telephones, security, crackdowns, you name it. It's a real time capsule there, so you can learn an awful lot just by going back and listening to the old radio shows. One of the things we documented was the crackdown. The crackdown of fiber optic, the crackdown of Kevin Mitnick, the crackdown of Bernie S. Bernie would call us from prison on the radio show. Now, this isn't a small radio station. This is a big radio station that has a transmitter on top of the Empire State Building in New York City and reaches 4 states. And that was before the internet came along and made us worldwide. We would do a radio show and it would simply reach people locally, which was potentially millions and millions of people. But then after we started to actually stream the shows and archive the shows, that went up into almost infinite numbers, and people all around the world were listening to what we were doing. So when all this happened with fiber optic and with Kevin and with Bernie, we were able to tell people. Now, ordinarily, the media doesn't let you do things like that. They don't let you get your story out. You have to be the media to do that. So we basically became the media by having a radio show on a radio station that let people speak their minds. And we started to develop a real following. Now, we do the radio show in a way that some people might disagree with, but we don't make it too technical, because if we make it overly technical, then all the people that don't already know about us will tune out. We have a philosophy where basically we try to do radio so that your grandmother will understand what we're talking about, but at the same time, making it interesting, relevant, and accurate. So we do talk about computers and technical issues, but we don't speak in jargonese. We don't make it so that if you're not part of our little clique, you don't understand what we're talking about. We try to make it so that not only will you understand, but you'll know why it's relevant. And so when we started talking about actual human beings being put into prison simply because they had computer equipment, or because they logged into a machine someplace, or because they answered somebody's questions, then real people, non-computer hacker people, started to say, wow, this is kind of fucked up. We should do something about this. And so we started to develop communities that were not in the computer hacker world, but who understand what it was that we were standing for. And they became our allies. They became people whose resources we could use. And we started to grow bigger in that sense. When it got really bad, when Bernie S. got transferred to a prison that was for hardened criminals, people who committed murder, that kind of thing. They put him there because they didn't like the fact that he was communicating with the outside world and telling people how the prison was. They would take action against him and do things like put him in really horrible places. Basically, he was attacked as soon as he arrived there and almost killed. He has the scars to this day. We were able to tell people about this on the radio, and within a matter of hours, we were organizing to have buses go down there, so we would surround the prison and demonstrate until they let him out. 2 days later, they let him out. They could have kept him there for an infinite number of days. He should have been released already, but according to Bernie, they just came to him and said, we're giving you a medical furlough, which is a phrase they had never used before. Apparently, all the politicians were getting very upset that all these phone calls were coming in, the media was starting to take an interest, and that got a result. They said, we don't need this bad publicity, let's just get rid of this guy. And well, we can either kill him or we can let him go, and they decided we're going to let him go. So that's that I think is evidence of how powerful the media can be and why it's so important for us as people to always have access in one way or another to the media, whether that be by putting out a magazine, whether that be by doing a radio show, or by making a documentary. That's the other thing we did. We were following the Kevin Mitnick case, and in 1998, Miramax announced plans to put out a movie, kind of a docudrama about the Kevin Mitnick case. Now keep in mind, Kevin Mitnick at that point, he had been arrested in 1995. This was 1998, so 3 years had gone by, and he hadn't even had a trial yet. He hadn't been found guilty of anything. Doesn't make for a very good film, does it? I mean, to have a guy just sitting in jail with no trial, you want some action. You want to make him the bad guy, right? So Miramax wrote a script, and they said in the script that, well, he had a trial and he was found guilty. So that's what a docudrama is. It's based on reality, and you use real names, but you kind of mess with. You're kidding. Oh my God, I haven't gotten started. All right, let me just wrap this one up. Basically, they wrote that he had been found guilty, and this was going to be the movie that told the Kevin Mitnick story to the world. This was how people would know Kevin Mitnick. It was a horrible nightmare, especially for him, still being in prison. So basically, that's when we decided we're going to make our own film. And we got together, we actually organized a little demonstration outside Miramax, which is in New York City. When I say little, I mean 15 people. That's not very many people. However, when Miramax looked out their window and saw us out there and realized, hey, there are hackers downstairs and they're outside our door, they panicked. They locked their doors, they wouldn't come out. They didn't know what was going to happen next. It really freaked them out to know that computer hackers were their enemy. They were very scared, and they rewrote the script. They rewrote the script 3 different times to try and fix some of these problems. So we give them some credit for that. The film still sucked. It was called Takedown, I don't know if you ever saw it. And it never got released to American theaters. But we were able to make our own documentary called Freedom Downtime, which, by the way, you can get on our website if you can reach it. And it's translated into Brazilian Portuguese. So, I wish I had brought a copy with me. But that's another example of how you can tell a story and get the word out. There's a whole lot more about the hacker culture. Let me just wrap up by saying that the world has changed a lot, obviously, since 9/11. Things in the United States have gotten kind of messed up. I'm sure you're all aware of that. Hey, I'm sorry about the fingerprinting thing they do now. I'm glad you guys did it to us because we sure deserve it. But basically, it's become a different world where there's all these new laws. There were laws in the past. There was the Clipper chip that didn't become law, thankfully. There was Kalia. There was all sorts of basically things being written to make possession of hardware or software a crime, to outlaw encryption, to basically keep an eye on us 24 hours a day. This was all before 9/11. This was all before Bush. So it's not like this is the cause. And the Bush administration is the only government in the United States that doesn't care about privacy. No, it's built into the system in many, many ways. And we have to change that, obviously, if we want to get away from that kind of thing. Today we have the USA Patriot Act, which obviously makes spying on people a lot easier, redefines terrorism, has all sorts of bad legislation. We have the mentality that we're about to get attacked, we have to keep an eye on people all the time, we're suspicious of everybody, and that unfortunately affects computer hackers a lot, because people, like I said at the beginning, don't understand what hackers do. And that makes them afraid, that makes them react in all sorts of irrational ways. And when something happens to a system, such as what happened to our system, and they don't understand it, they cry for blood. And they think anybody who knows too much is a threat. And that's the kind of thinking that we have to fight against. And we do that by education, by reaching out to people, and by not backing down, by not buying into the rhetoric and refusing to explore and learn how systems work and answer people's questions. I think the more we do that, the better a world it will be. It might be difficult to get there because of the way people act these days, the suspicion that's out there. But I'm sure that that will prevail if we keep basically trying to lure people into our world and let them understand that hacking is not a bad thing. It's an essential thing. It's an important thing today. And it's what built the internet. It's what built a lot of technology around us. And it's what can build a lot of cool things in the future. A lot more I'd like to say, but talk to me afterwards. I'll be around. Thanks very much. One more thing with the conference next year, Edicao, New York City. I know they'll fingerprint you at the airport, but it's worth it. They'll fingerprint you too, make it a game or something. I'll leave the brochures up here. They're actually just pieces of paper. Thank you.
Thanks, Emmanuel. Really appreciate it. Sorry about the hurry. Vocês entenderam o que falou da última Sh0t? Sh0t conferência, que eles fazem, essa vai ser a 20ª Sh0t. Então, se isso aqui... O quê? Não, que é a última Sh0t, então... Julho do ano que vem, 18 a 20 de julho. Programe-se. Tem uma teoria aí, mas não pode falar. Isso aqui, pelo menos, para souvenir, certo. Chile, tem que fechar um negócio.
Não, só sobra pra mim, né? Sei lá, acabou. A gente não combinou nada pra variar, né? Bom, agradecemos aí a todos que nos prestigiaram aí. Deve ter gente aí que talvez nunca tenha ouvido o nosso podcast, então, por favor, www.naupod.com.br, dá uma escutadinha lá e é isso aí. Boa noite, hein? Obrigado. Beleza, hein? Cadê o Nelson?
Um abraço, Nelson vai mandar um e-mail.
Ó, se o Nelson não aparecer, é o seguinte: o primeiro que abraçar e tirar uma foto, a gente dá um brinde dele.